Hi, welcome to my new YouTube channel. This is a long time in coming. I've played with it for a while. I've actually had the channel for over a year, and I've had some video outtakes that I've been accumulating for over a year. Lisa Kay just finished editing some of these so that we can put them out. What I'd like to do is put out the hefty goal, the lofty notion is that I put these out once a week. It may take a little bit longer to do so with editing and time constraints or whatnot. It's also interesting to note that this is being recorded during the COVID-19 crisis and that I'm in my office closed up, not taking any appointments, so this is a good time to do this. I know, like many of you, this is one of those things where it's like I can get it done when I have time. It turns out I got a lot of time, so it's time to start a YouTube channel. What I'd like to do here in this opening one is talk a little bit about me and what my background is and what my background is not, so that I can clear up any misconceptions that may arise during my processing. Let me start by saying this is my process. This is how I have learned to see the world in the arena of massage therapy, medical massage therapy. This is how I have learned to enhance my clients' lives and to make their ailments a little bit better. So this is what I have found works for me. Over that time, in trying to thought process through how I want this YouTube channel to progress, what I found is what you're about to see is how I think what I'm showing on this YouTube channel is the best way for you to experience what I'm doing in my practice. Working career started as a chef, as a cook. I worked a lot of fast foods. I tell people that I have no unfulfilled food fantasies. I worked as an American Culinary Federation certified cook for a number of years. I was the first and only graduating apprentice from the Inland Empire Chefs Association. I worked hotels, country clubs, fine gourmet dining restaurants. I worked for Wolfgang Puck. I opened the Wolfgang Puck in Ontario. I've done lots of catering. I've been to some interesting places, and my food career lasted well over 20 years. I also drank through it, and I burned out through it, and I eventually ended my cooking career as a cook in the jail for the San Bernardino County Sheriff Department. When I got done with that career, and I was really tired of working in jail and tired of working graveyards, I looked for a different thing to do with my life and found that massage therapy interested me, and that took almost 2 or 3 years to work my head around. A place locally opened up that billed itself as medical massage, and I liked that idea because it was not fluff and it was not a contemporary kind of massage where you're just doing what we in the business call lotion pushing. I learned very quickly that medical massage entails a lot of anatomy, which I was not good at. In fact, I failed my first anatomy test utterly, in tears, running out of the room because I was 37 and I couldn't get it and it didn't make sense. The way I learned anatomy eventually was through the coloring book, through touching and seeing and coloring and writing. And thus I started the beginning of how I learn really difficult stuff. Part of what went on in my head was when they talk about the acromion process, I'm stuck on, why do you got to call that the acromion process? Why can't they just call it the bone that hangs off the end of the shoulder? And by the time I got done with that process, they were 4 bones away and I was lost. So it took me a while to learn that tactile information, tactile learning, was a thing that made the most amount of sense to me. You're going to see in these videos, that's the way I'm teaching as well, because that's how I see the world. That's how I see the body. From medical massage school, I found Reiki, which was energy work. I don't practice Reiki anymore. Occasionally I do get a Reiki treatment. There's a lady here in town that does a marvelous job at it. But it's energy work, and it's got a stigma to it, quite frankly, that a lot of people will not buy into. A whole different story. Maybe I'll do a video on that later. From Reiki, I found craniosacral therapy, and I found craniosacral therapy through an educational service provider, and this was not the Upledger brand of craniosacral therapy. That was the guy that was teaching the classes brand. I did 4 sessions with them, and towards the end of those sessions, found that I was not getting the information I was looking for, and I stopped going. Along that time frame, I bumped into a friend of mine who talked me into going to Jean-Pierre Barral's visceral manipulation classes. They were taught through the Upledger Institute, and immediately I became enamored with the way that they taught, because their anatomy and structuring of how they viewed what they were teaching was so far above everybody else that I'd ever seen, that I decided to go back and apply for craniosacral therapy through Upledger Institute as well. So simultaneously, over the course of the next 4 years, I took an Upledger class in craniosacral therapy and a Upledger Barral class in visceral manipulation, and started learning a lot about the body that is not taught in massage school. From there, I started following breadcrumbs. There were a lot of different and other types of paths in the manual manipulation world that I learned from. And each one of those, I found that I would take a little piece of that curriculum that worked for me and that fit for me and that I could buy into and that I could articulate back to people. And I put it in my toolbox. And I continued primarily through Upledger and learning more about that. But there were lots of different instructional classes that I learned from as well, and just put each one of those in my toolbox. I was just talking yesterday to a friend of mine. If you've ever been to a class where the icebreaker is, tell me what your superpower would be if you had one, and you go in a circle and everybody talks about their superpower, you hear people say, I'd like to fly, or I'd like to become invisible, or I wish I could walk on water. Mine has always been, when they get around to me, my superpower would be to have everybody's superpower. And I find that's the same way that I teach. I can't and don't prescribe to a single methodology. I like to take a little piece of everybody's methodology, and that's the way the body makes the most amount of sense to me. What became really pivotal in my work, because I was still working for the county in a different capacity at the time, was that I found a 3-week dissection class in San Francisco with a brilliant anatomy teacher by the name of Gil Headley. It turns out it was the first and only time that he would be teaching the 3-week class. I bumped into it through a mutual friend who talked me into it. I found that it was a thing I had to do, not a thing I wanted to do, so it really called to me. And I ponied up the money and the time, and I went up and spent 3 weeks in a lab with 50 people from all over the world who were anatomists. We call ourselves somonauts, and there were 12 forms, and I learned about the human body in a way that had never been taught to me before. And when I could see on the inside of this thing what I'd been touching on the outside, this whole world of anatomy lit up. And I took that and found that with the tools in the toolbox that I had and the new intermingling of anatomical structures that I had just learned from this class that are not in the books, that my practice grew exponentially and people started getting better. I do not want to talk bad about the medical profession here, but I will perhaps butt heads occasionally with the medical profession here, because a lot of times what I find is people that have been to the medical profession to fix some of the pains and anomalies that they're having find that there are no solutions within that world. And when they come to me and others like me, we do have solutions that are mostly soft tissue related, and it's because we understand these structures in a way that don't follow medical protocols currently. From Gil Headley's class, I bumped into another brilliant anatomist and very good friend of mine now by the name of Julian Baker, who was an anatomist who did dissection classes in the UK. Specifically, he was teaching at Oxford, and doing dissection classes. Started with Gil in Scotland. And after a couple years, he talked me into going to one of his 11-day classes, and I spent 11 days doing a dissection with him. And that in turn led to trying to bring him over here to America and have him teach some of his classes over here, where we found and fell in love with and partnered with the Institute of Anatomical Research in Colorado Springs, Colorado. It's an anatomy lab that's independently operated, and they have an independent private donor program so that there is a lot less red tape involved in procuring a human form to do some of the work that they do. And so we're now greatly entrenched in bringing classes to that institution and bringing Julian over to do dissection classes. And Gil Headley does in fact, Gil Headley's doing all of his dissection classes out of that institution as well. So it's becoming a bit of a hub for some really cool people to do some really cool things. Anyway, back to how and why I want to teach this. So I've come across in the last couple of years some really interesting subjects who have some really interesting pains or scars or issues that a lot of my colleagues in the massage world don't have. And I found through a lot of them getting better or changing their pain levels or finding that their restrictions have lessened, that the work that I've done on them can be something that can help other massage therapists learn from and perhaps spark them to want to go to some of these extracurricular classes to learn more about how the body functions on the inside as opposed to what we were taught from the outside. So what you'll see in these classes that I'm teaching here online, they're going to be relatively short. They will involve my actual clients with permission. And I will start with explaining the story. One of the things I teach with is the story of how the trauma began. In working on a client, one of the things that happens is I'm going to sit down and I'm going to talk to them and I'm going to ask them what's bothering them. And with some of these interesting cases that you're going to see, there's always a story that goes with how the trauma began, what was happening when the trauma began. I don't just see the scar tissue. I don't just see the issue. I don't just see the pain construct that they're talking about, although that's certainly one of the things they come in with. And sometimes they may come in with the mindset of, this is how it hurts. One of the best things I've seen at a class one time, a teacher says, people come in and they tell us, this is where it hurts. When I look at them, this is what I see. That made so much sense to me. And with the addition of Gil's class, I was able to see how that made sense to me. There are a lot of things going on in here. Pulleys, wires, tubes, soft tissue, sheets of fascia. It's all connected. And sometimes you're going to get a left shoulder issue that's all the way down in the knee. And you have to be able to know how to articulate that, see that, understand what the pressures and traumas and pulleys and wires and things that happened in this story caused that. Sometimes it's emotional. Sometimes it's structural. But we can get into, and I will get into, books and theories and thought processes and hopefully stepping stones of how I got to that point and can show you how to get there as well. So what you're going to see here is, hopefully, this is my goal, what you're going to see here is I'm going to draw on that board behind me. You can see a little bit of a structure that I did just yesterday for somebody, right? I love to draw. That's how, at the beginning, I told you, that's how I learned anatomy. And I find that if I can pair the brain when I'm explaining to somebody, it helps them learn too. Not all the time, but that's going to make the most amount of sense to me. I'm going to have a piece on the board that I'm going to draw, and I'm going to explain part of the story. I may even have some pictures from them that they allowed me to take that I can show you pictures of them. And then we're going to go from there and go to the table, and I will either have a model or the actual person on the table. And if it helps, I will take a utensil and mark the structures on the body and tell the story on the actual physical form, and then we'll go through and I'll talk about the procedures I used, what I did to help alleviate those structures, what we found when we were talking through these structures, and maybe even, if they're willing, do a little post interview with them and have them talk about their experience at the end of it if there's been some time. So welcome to my YouTube channel. Thank you for subscribing. If you like it, please like it. And also tell your friends, anybody that's in this business, anybody that loves anatomy, anybody that's looking for some different alternative therapies, this might be a place they can come. Have them subscribe too. Thank you, and have a great day.